A man flew from France to New York in 2008 to tell an auction room a wine didn't exist. The catalog listed Domaine Ponsot Clos St-Denis, 1945 and 1971. He was the winemaker, he'd know. His family made their first Clos St-Denis in 1982. So what was actually in those bottles? The man who consigned them was a soft-spoken collector in his early 30s. They called Dr. Conti. Rudy Kurniawan. For about 5 years, he was the most important wine buyer alive. And a lot of what he sold came out of a kitchen sink in suburban Los Angeles. Rudy arrived in Southern California around 2000, polite, generous, and vague about where the money came from. A wealthy Indonesian family, people said. Nobody pressed, because nobody wanted to be rude about it. He found the LA wine scene, doctors, lawyers, men with cellars the size of 2 car garages. At first he was the quiet one at the table, asking what he was supposed to be noticing. Then he got good. Then he got unnerving, naming grape, region and vintage blind off 2 sips. That part was genuine. He had a real gift, and the gift is what made the rest believable. He bought constantly. Dealers called him before catalogs printed because he never asked the price twice. He'd open a bottle worth a used car on a Tuesday, for 6 people, for no occasion. You know the dinner where someone waves your card away and orders another round. Now scale that up. Generosity buys something money can't. Nobody wants to be the guy who questions the man pouring. In 2006 he consigned his collection to a New York auction house and broke the world record. One weekend of his bottles brought in close to $25 million. He was also one of the biggest buyers in the room. Both sides of the same market. That should have been the first question somebody asked out loud. Nobody did. Auction houses take a cut of the hammer price. Doubt costs money. Enthusiasm pays it back. But here's what still bothers people in the wine world, all these years later. The bottles tasted right. Not passable, not close enough. Collectors described them as the best they'd had. Men who'd spent 40 years drinking legendary Burgundy sat there quietly moved by Napa Cabernet. So how do you fake a century-old wine well enough to move the people who wrote the books? You start with the bottle, because the glass is the part nobody thinks to inspect. Rudy sourced genuine empties, restaurants that had poured the real thing and thrown the bottles out. Somewhere there's a busboy who got asked to save the recycling, and never learned why. Right glass, right shape, right punt in the base. Half the forgery done before any wine is poured. Then, labels. He printed them himself, then aged the paper until it looked like a damp cellar wall. Investigators later described a whole workshop, templates, printers, blank stock, rubber stamps, sealing wax, soaking trays. Corks branded with the right estate name, pushed in by hand, capsule on top, wax over that. From 2 feet away, in candlelight, at a dinner where everyone's already excited, flawless. And the wine inside? That's the detail that sounds like a joke until you read the tasting notes. Young Napa Cabernet. Ordinary Bordeaux. California Pinot Noir. Cheap parts, chosen for shape rather than pedigree. He blended them at home, tasting, adjusting, tasting again, the way you'd fix a pot of soup. The FBI eventually found his notes. Recipes, in his own handwriting, with proportions for specific famous wines. A legendary vintage written out like something scribbled on the back of an envelope. Now here's the part that isn't really about wine. It's about what tasting actually is. Almost nobody at those tables had ever tasted a 1945 Burgundy. There was no reference in their heads. Everyone expects a wine that old, to be fragile, faded, strange, so strangeness reads as age. The flaws become evidence. Thin? That's the vintage. Odd? That's 70 years in a cellar. And you're never tasting blind. You're tasting a label, a price, and a room full of people nodding. Researchers have shown that simply telling someone a wine is expensive changes activity in the brain's pleasure circuits. Not just their answer, their actual response. The same coffee tastes better from the place with the line. So the taste test was never a test. It was a confirmation, and everybody wanted to pass it. Rudy wasn't beating expert palates. He was renting them. They did the hard part on his behalf. That's what a great con really does. It doesn't defeat your judgment, it borrows it and hands it back. If that just reframed how you hear the word expert, that's exactly what this channel is for. Stick around. Because expectation is almost unbeatable. But Rudy needed one more thing, and that thing had an edge. A story. Where does a young man get hundreds of bottles that barely exist anymore? He mentioned the grandmother's cellar, a family friend in Asia, a European dealer. The details drifted. Nobody wrote them down carefully because in wine, provenance is often just whoever swears they know. A bottle's history is a sentence, someone said once. Nobody audits sentences, not until 2008. In April 2008, a catalog went out for a sale held at a restaurant in Manhattan. Among the lots, Bottles of Domaine Ponsot Clos St-Denis. Vintages running from the 1940s through 1971. In Burgundy, Laurent Ponsot got word about the listing from someone who'd read the catalogue. Laurent runs the domain. His father ran it before him. His grandfather started the whole thing. He read the vintages twice, and something didn't fit. His family's first Clos St-Denis was 1982. Not rare before 1982. Not hard to find. The wine had simply never been made. They didn't work that vineyard yet. There was nothing to bottle. Those years are blank. So either the family history was wrong, or someone had invented a run of vintages out of nothing. He called the auction house and asked them to pull the lots. They kept them in the sale. So he bought a plane ticket to New York on 2 days' notice to stand in that room. Picture it. A working winemaker walking into a Manhattan dining room to challenge his own name on a label. The lots came out before bidding, quietly, the way expensive embarrassments usually do. But pulling the bottles didn't answer anything. Ponsot wanted to know where they'd come from. So he asked Rudy directly, one question with only one right answer. Who sold you these? Rudy gave him a name, a man in Indonesia, and a phone number to check it. Ponsot chased it. The number went nowhere. The man behind it never quite turned into a person. Then Rudy offered a second source, a merchant in Europe. Ponsot went and asked them himself. They'd never sold him anything. No chain, no seller, no shipment. The paper trail was one man's word. And notice what actually caught him, because it isn't the thing anyone would have predicted. No expert spat one out. No lab cracked the blend. No tasting note said, "This is California." He was caught by a date. 4 digits, printed on a label, by his own printer. A flavor is an opinion, and an opinion can be talked into almost anything. A vintage year is a claim about the world, and somewhere out there, someone owns the answer. Laurent Ponsot spent the years after that tracking bottles wearing his family's name. The list kept growing. He said he's still finding them. Fakes outlive the forger, and that's the whole problem with them. Meanwhile, a billionaire named Bill Koch worked out that his cellar was full of counterfeits. Koch had the money to be angry professionally. He hired investigators and started filing lawsuits. Those investigators found bottles rejected as fake by one auction house quietly reappearing at another. In March 2012, FBI agents knocked on a door in Arcadia, a quiet suburb east of Los Angeles. Inside was the kitchen. Bottles at every stage of becoming older than they actually were. Labels soaking. Labels drying. Stacks of printed labels for wines worth more than the house they sat in. Corks, stamps, wax, funnels, and a sink where the world's greatest Burgundies were being assembled by hand. There were empty bottles waiting on vintages that hadn't been invented yet. Orders in progress. He was arrested that morning. Prosecutors put the fraud in the tens of millions of dollars. In December 2013, a jury convicted him, the first person in America found guilty of counterfeiting wine. 10 years in prison, plus an order to repay more than $28 million he no longer had. He served most of the sentence, was released, and in 2022 was deported back to Indonesia. But the bottles stayed. Thousands of them, sitting in cellars and vaults and auction catalogs right now. Some of the most expensive wine on earth is resting under a label he ran through a printer. Nobody knows which ones. That's the real damage, not the money he took, the doubt he left behind. Open a great old bottle today, and there's a second question in the room that didn't used to be there. And that's the useful part, because this isn't only about wine. It's about how you check anything. When you can't verify the thing itself, verify the story around it. Find the claim that carries a date. Rudy beat every palate on earth. He lost to a man who knew what year his family started. Subscribe if you want more cons. Undone by one small detail. Next, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Twice. Cases like this deserve to be remembered, and not for the forger. Thanks for sitting with it.